Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and today I'm so excited for us all to hear about the way that today's guest and fellow entrepreneur thinks, because this is clearly a builder at heart, and I mean that in every sense of the word, whether that means he's building and architecting systems and cybersecurity systems and different IT systems, or building his business. He's very much in building mode right now. We're going to learn a lot from today's guest. Let me introduce you to him. His name is David Beltran. David is a veteran of the IT industry with over 30 years of hands-on experience. 20 of those years were in cybersecurity, 14 of which were spent at IBM, where he rose through the ranks from incident response to fully fledged architect. He's designed, he's built, he's configured and established governance and best practices for Fortune 500 companies, and was responsible for ensuring that millions of endpoints across the world were fortified against ever-evolving threats. And the reason why I love that part of his professional career is because now, as an entrepreneur, he's building a business that is in a solution that is aimed to combat and hopefully completely end phishing, not the FISH type of phishing, but the PHISH type of phishing that we all face, whether you're a business owner, not a business owner at all. We all face phishing attacks, and he's doing that using AI. And then their long-term focus is on introducing robust cybersecurity solutions into the Web3 and blockchain space, because there's so much going on there. We all hear about blockchain, but today's guest, he's going to help us make sense about all the threats, all the opportunities, the way that we can protect ourselves. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with David Beltran. All right, David, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Heck yes. I love the fact that you've taken your incredible career, more than 30 years in the industry, and now you're building something that has the potential to make a lot of lives a lot better, a lot more protected. So I'd love for you to take us beyond the bio. Who's David? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
So I've always been insanely curious about computers, right? So I was the bane of my mother's existence when I was a child. I used to take my toys apart and just try to examine how they work to understand what the inner workings were, of course, much to my mother's chagrin. When I discovered computers in the late 90s, I saw a device that I knew back then was going to rule our existence, right? So I wanted to learn everything that I could about them. In school, I enrolled in every computer program that I can possibly enroll in. I learned about software. I taught myself how to code. I began learning about the inner workings, how hardware communicated with each other on a very fundamental level. Once I understood how integrated circuits worked, I understood assembly language, and I understood all the inner workings of the main board and how software talked to it. It was like discovering a master key, right? So everything that I learned after that, I was able to learn a lot easier because of the fact that I had this fundamental knowledge. So I got my first break working in IT in the early 2000s, working for Compaq. I was working over at the help desk. I was helping people put together their Compaq Presario, which were not amazing machines and were very difficult to operate from a user's perspective. Fielding all these questions helped to fuel my knowledge a bit further. But during this process, I used to get phone calls from individuals who would find themselves on the sharp end of a virus attack or some sort of phishing attack, or just would try to have me explain to them why their computer was behaving a certain way. And when I dug under the covers, I would say, "Hey, look, you're infected with a virus." And these people were like, "Hey, I bought this. I just want to look at my grandchildren's pictures online. I didn't really buy it for this particular purpose to get infected with this." So feeling that, I began to dig a little bit deeper into how exactly these threats were created, how they manifested, and how they were deployed out into the field. And the way that I work, because I'm a very hands-on learner, was by getting deep into the dark side of things. Back then in the 2000s, we had what was called MIRC, A lot of these, the underworld back then was isolated there, whereas today you have Discord. So I went down there. I made friends with a lot of people who were in this sort of emerging dark web of technology, and I understood how they thought, exactly what their motivations were, how it was that they created these particular pieces of software. And in learning that, I was able to learn how to reverse engineer them, how to prevent people from getting caught up in these particular scams, and helping them really just it gave me it gave me a better perspective, right? I knew exactly what it was that I wanted to do at that particular point in time. Even though I was learning about networking and computer servers and all kinds of technology, nothing really piqued my interest more than malware, because malware was designed to break all of that. And my whole learning mechanism is breaking and fixing. So I started my own business. I was doing some consulting work, because a lot of times, to get hired by a company, you needed experience. But these were like entry level positions. So I asked myself, how am I going to get experience to work at this place if I can't work at this place to get the experience? So I decided to start my own company. I hired myself. I began to do some consulting gigs. I worked at hospitals. I worked for several Fortune 500 companies doing deployments, and doing incident response, and particularly doing incident response as it related to malware incidences. So in the late 2000s, we had the economic downturn that wasn't exactly good for business. So I began looking for work, and I wound up at IBM. At IBM, I started very basic level. I started doing incident response for them, and then I worked my way up. Since I started my career in the 2000s, I always knew that I wanted to be an architect, because I like looking at the big picture. I like seeing how things worked from a worldwide perspective. And being at IBM, not only was it epic for me because I admired the company since I was in high school, but it was a chance for me to see how these Fortune 100 companies were laid out in a very large perspective. So very quickly, I moved from incident response to becoming an SME, to ultimately becoming an architect. What we did was we deployed endpoint security solutions for companies that had thousands to millions of endpoints deployed in places across the globe that I hadn't heard of until that particular point in time. I learned how viruses were spread around the world, how malware acted, and gain an understanding of how the anonymity of the internet gave people a sort of pass on doing harm to others that weren't within their vicinity. And I always knew that this is one thing that I certainly wanted to put a stop to.
Yeah, gosh, so much for us to dig into, David. I really appreciate that overview, especially because you started at childhood, and the fact that all the way back to childhood, you talk about taking things apart and really figuring out how they work. And then I really want to pick on that one term that you use, which is, of course, the dark side. We can't talk about your industry without talking about the dark side. And I'm very grateful that there are great people like you inside of your industry, David, that are looking out for all of us, because a lot of us, we ignore the dark side. We don't know how to think like the bad actors out there. And so when I think about the mission that you're on, and obviously the company that you're building, the solutions that you're building, I go straight to phishing. It's a very real thing that every single one of us, we'll definitely talk about blockchain at some point in today's episode and conversation, but a phishing solution, that's a real threat that we face in our email inboxes, in our text messages. It seems like that's an ever rising threat as well, that I'm constantly trying to get my parents to not click things when they don't know where they're coming from. David, talk to us about phishing, because I still find it crazy that not everybody understands what phishing is and how the heck we can stay protected against it.
Yeah, so I mean, phishing, it scrolls a lot of categories, right? You have emails with malicious attachments that say, hey, your bank account has been suspended. Click on this link, open up this PDF, or click on this link to go to your site, enter your user ID and password, and validate your user ID so that your bank account can get running. Because we live very busy lives, right? Particularly myself, I'm a single parent. I know what it's like. I've worked multiple jobs. Sometimes if you get an alert, you immediately say, "Oh my God, I need to check this out. I need to click on this link," and next thing you know, you find yourself compromised, right? Your bank account is empty, or your computer is infected with a virus. And short-circuiting that particular mentality that the phishers want, right? They want to develop that sense of urgency within you that you need to click on this particular link, otherwise something bad is going to happen. And ultimately clicking on the link is the bad thing that's going to happen. It's hard to train people to do that, particularly when they're living their busy lives, which is one of the reasons why even corporate programs that are meant to assist people with derailing these sort of concepts, they fall flat on their face, because sometimes they'll get emails that come directly from within the company that are spoofed, and they don't know that they're spoofed, right? Which says, hey, there's an accounting error. I need you to take a look at the spreadsheet and let me know what's going on here. You open up the spreadsheet and it's a virus. The other thing is social engineering, right? And that's one thing that is harder to detect. And those are the ones that say, well, hey, I'm calling from customer service. I need you to give me the user ID and password for this particular service. I work directly for your company, and I just need access to your system real quick to take a look at some things. Some people will give them remote access without knowing that they're giving a threat actor remote access into their own system, because the email looked legitimate, it sounded legitimate, it sounded like it came from their own company. And so even though we've spent, since the evolution of phishing, which goes back to the very inception of corporate email itself, we're going back to the late 80s, right? We've been trying to train people to get ahead of this. And even today, knowing this as a fact, phishing still accounts for over 92% of all malware incidents. It's still something that is a very real threat. And my thinking is that the only way to really get ahead of this is to keep it out of the user inbox to begin with. And now that we live in one of the greatest ages in the computer industry that we know of, with having AI, right, and AI understanding natural language, we can utilize it to not only pick up emails that are coming from spoofed addresses, but we can also read the email to understand whether or not this is a social engineering attempt. And some of them are really good, especially now with AI. Before it used to be like, oh yeah, look for misspellings or look for bad grammar in the email. But now you have people writing their emails with AI that look legitimate, and they look like they come from where they're supposed to come from. And so, the fooling is getting a lot easier. The technology is not keeping up. And so that's one thing that I really want to get ahead of.
Yeah, I really appreciate those insights. I figured that phishing would be one of the biggest threats. Turns out it is overwhelmingly the biggest threat. And so it's really cool, especially when you talk about AI's ability to make sense of our inbound emails. Obviously, our email inbox is probably the biggest source of all of that. And I think to myself, sometimes it is so apparent to myself. I like to think I have high attention to detail, and I'll see an email that alleges to come from PayPal, for example, but the email address, the from address, is abc1234567@gmail.com. And I'm just like, that's obviously not PayPal. But I can see how someone who's busy, who's on the go, especially on their mobile device, probably wouldn't even recognize that from address. So why can't AI be the solution there? And I'm super grateful that you are building these types of solutions to prevent these things from ever getting to that point. But what I also really appreciate, David, about your story is you clearly love technology, and you see the good side of technology and the possibilities of technology. I'm going to pick on the blockchain for a second here, that a lot of people, we talk about the powers of blockchain and how it is going to one day, hold the deeds and titles to our houses, our cars, all of these important documents in a really organized fashion that can't be duplicated. But where your head goes is you also say, well, with all of these powers comes the potential for abuse. Talk to us about that, because I feel like your voice and your expertise, it's needed when we talk about the powers of any of these tech innovations.
Yeah, when it comes to blockchain, I've always been very curious about the distributed ledger. And once I learned about it, I learned about the layer one solutions and how exactly they operate. I saw a way to facilitate, a better way for us to validate transactions independent of our own external sources. But once I began to delve into the world of Web3, which revolves around this whole blockchain concept, I found that, as was said in Star Wars, it is a den of scum and villainy. It is absolutely rife with individuals who will sell you anything and everything under the radar to make a profit and to take money out of your pocket. So the blockchain itself is inherently secure, but the technology around it, the entire Web3 infrastructure is something that we really need to be mindful of, especially once we get into. And so the way that it's distributed, using this sort of decentralized ecosystem, it says, okay, you need to trust your neighbor to validate these transactions on the system, which is fair in practice, but think about it. I mean, a lot of us can't trust our neighbors, right? So my whole take on it is that, if you're going to use a distributed ledger, at least I like the permissioned approach, where I have people who I trust who are running the validators, and not people who are just strangers and can be doing things like front running or any of these other malicious attacks that happen on the blockchain that are meant to take money away from you. The way I see it is that, on the web with the anonymity, the moment that somebody wants to take advantage of you, they will. So you have to have that mentality when you're building a solution, particularly around the blockchain. And if you're using the public ledger, if you're using Ethereum or if you're using Solana or any others, understand that these are publicly validated systems and that you should treat them that way. Any data that you want to maintain and you want to keep private, you might not want to use these particular systems. You might want to use something that's a bit more private. So that's kind of my take when it comes to the blockchain.
Yeah, David, it's really cool hearing you talk about any of these topics that I'm bringing up with you in today's conversation, because obviously I know this about you, but I'm excited for you to share more about it with our audience, is that you're multi-passionate. You go where you started your overview with it. Curiosity is what guides so much of your personal and professional life. And so just to tease listeners with some of your hobbies, you're also into photography, novel writing. You're a twice published digital artist with a piece currently headed to the moon as part of the Life ship on board the lunar lander. David, you've got to take us down this path, because one, I obviously want to hear more about those things, but secondly, I really want to tie that in with the way that you think, the way that you see the world, and how that plays into the way that you build things, and also how it plays into your entrepreneurial thought process and your entrepreneurial ambitions.
Oh yeah, so I've always found myself, I'm not right or left brain dominant. I am as happy doing my taxes as I am making a piece of art. Although making a piece of art makes me a little bit happier, right? So I've always had, like I mentioned, I've always been insanely curious, and I always wanted to do what I love, right? So I love the outdoors. I've always had a thing for photography. I've always had a thing for art. And I've always had a thing for just satiating my curiosity whenever it comes to any artistic endeavors or looking under the covers for things. So when I approach my business, like when I approach my business plan, I looked at it like I was creating a piece of art, right? It was validated from beginning to end. I had a full plan drawn out. And I step back and I look at it and I'm like, wow, this is a work of art, right? So anything in my eyes, a piece of code, right, can be art, anything to that effect. So in my thinking, in my entrepreneurial thinking, I'm able to look at individuals, particularly as I'm hiring them, and see their potential, right? I can see if they like creating things in the background. I know that they're going to make a great coder because they're great at working in environments where things aren't exactly laid out, right? Where the structure isn't there, right? And having that artistic mindset really helps you, especially when it comes to creating when there's nothing. And that's the whole thing about creating a business, especially when you're creating a business when you're at the frontier, like we are of technological innovation, is that having that creator mindset is incredibly huge, especially especially as a founder. So when it came to digital art, it was something that I dove into the minute that I could because I love computers so much. It helped me to better understand computers. And when AI was released, going into creating art using AI was a fantastic way to understand how AI functioned and how AI thought, right? So it tickled both parts of my brain. You have this sort of chaos logic that AI uses and this creative ability that it has all mixed up into one big thing. So I really think that creatives make the best entrepreneurs. And that's just me. I'm biased because, that's just the way that I think.
Yeah, I will say, David, obviously in the line of work that I do, I talk about entrepreneurship every single day of my life. I've never heard anyone articulate it the way that you just did. I love that. And really, you just presented here live on the air of the challenges, but also the beauty of building a business. As you said, it's creating when there is nothing and operating without all the pieces already on the table for you. It's not that we're just putting pieces together. We're figuring out what are the pieces. We're doing so much. You talk about your business plan. I'd love for you to introduce listeners to CypherShield because I love the fact that you're in the process of building solutions. You're in the process of bringing these things to life. Talk to us about the short and long-term goals of CypherShield because I did tease a few of them at the top of the episode.
Yeah, so what we're ultimately building right now is something that is called consensus logic. So I started out, working with the blockchain and a lot of other technologies, and then ultimately I said, hey, if I can solve this phishing problem using this sort of consensus algorithm, I can apply this to other things, right? So the way that it works is that in IBM, we were told that if you're going to use AI, make sure that you use different models and give them the same query, look at the results of those queries, and then develop a consensus based upon those results. So I thought, hey, why don't we build a model that talks to different models, gets that consensus, aggregates it, and then gives you those results. Of course, at the time, it was early on, and we didn't have the scalability to do that. So now, with a couple of new protocols that have been released, and how rapidly AI is evolving, I see that is entirely possible, that I can create what's called a consensus aggregator, which will speak to different AI models. In other words, I'm looking at talking to ChatGPT, talking to Anthropic, talking to Perplexity, not talking to ChatGPT, because you don't want to send the same query to the same model. The way I look at models is as individuals because they have different training data sets, because they answer questions differently, and because they approach the subject matter differently. One may give you answers that the other one may not, even though that they agree on the same subject. So the core of CypherShield is taking this consensus algorithm and then applying it to different industries. So in the medical field, where accuracy is paramount, right? Having that consensus between different what's called a mixture of experts or different subject matter experts based upon a diagnosis is extremely important. And in the financial sector, detecting fraud, in aerospace, trying to figure out maintenance routines and getting ahead of any issues before they actually happen is extremely important. With the consensus model, we can do that. And now with that, right, we enter the realm of science fiction, which is where we're at now. Like, I'm a science fiction writer. I realize that if I take this consensus model and I split it, and now I have more small language models talking to these consensus algorithm models, I can create what essentially is a distributed collective consciousness, right? I could have multiple models solving their own problems, talking to the consensus aggregator, which understands the mission and then reports back to them. So let's say there's a wildfire, right? I have a consensus aggregator. It understands how to fight wildfires. You have drones, which have their own small language models, which understand the mission. They're flying over the field. They're following firefighters as they're battling the blaze. They're keeping them safe. They're identifying hotspots. They're finding any casualties out there. They're reporting all this back to the aggregator. The humans are interpreting this logic. And it's all working like a big seamless system. This is now entirely possible. So, what at our core, using this particular consensus aggregator framework that we're building is ultimately what CypherShield is about. We're not going to just tackle phishing the security industry. We're not just tackling cybersecurity, but we're going into frontier level solutions that have never been tried before, and some which are currently on the market, but we're doing it completely differently. That's kind of our approach.
Wow, David, I have heard a lot of conversations, both here on the show and obviously just in me geeking out on YouTube, consuming all of the content that I possibly can about AI. I've never heard anyone talk about this consensus approach that you're talking about. I picture it, basically, I mean, I'm in a room right now, obviously. I picture kind of having a council of AI experts all validating and bouncing these ideas off of each other. We talk about the very real problems of AI, such as hallucination, and this is for sure the most clever approach. And I love the fact that so much of it, coming back to your multi-passionate curiosity, is that you being a science fiction author, I would imagine that your brain, you can picture these things. You picture them as a council, bouncing ideas off of them. So this is very cool to hear about, David. I'm so appreciative for you coming here on the air and sharing so much of this stuff with us. I'm going to put you on the spot one last time. It's the question that I ask at the end of every episode, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and also knowing that you're not just a subject matter expert, you are one of us, you are a fellow entrepreneur. What's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with today?
What I always say to people is a few things, right? Always follow your curiosity. Keep that childlike curiosity. Don't let it go. The other thing is, do what you love. And if you can't do what you love, make a plan to get there eventually. That light at the end of the tunnel is the greatest. It's the greatest incentive that you have, even in the darkest of times. And most of all, invest in yourself. As an entrepreneur, you're going to get pulled in a lot of different directions. A lot of people are going to want your attention. You're going to be working odd hours, holidays, weekends, etc. Make sure to take time for yourself. You are important. Your mindset is important, and people are going to be looking up to you. So you got to make sure that you take that time out to just relax. And for me, my favorite place to be is lost in thought. I'm an ambivert, right? So I like engaging with people, but I also like sitting in a room, staring at nothing, and just thinking. And if that's your thing, do it. If you like just engaging with people, do it. Just do what you love, and just make sure that you maintain a very healthy and forward-thinking mindset.
Yes, so well said. David, I could sit here and talk to you all day. Honestly, you not only clearly think a lot, but you think about really interesting things that we as a society face, and I expect nothing less from an incredible author such as yourself. And I love the fact that you're pairing all of these passions with entrepreneurship, and the fact that you're building solutions that are making the world a better place. So, David, you've been such a wealth of knowledge. I love that advice for our listeners. For anyone who wants to follow along in your journey, and especially with your company, CypherShield, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Sure, yeah. So my site isn't built right now, cyphershield.io, but I will drop my LinkedIn. My LinkedIn has pretty much everything that you guys need, and any other links I'll provide as well. But mostly LinkedIn. Connect with me there, and I'll be glad to talk to you.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find David's direct LinkedIn link down below in the show notes. We're going to drop it directly in there, so you don't have to go finding him. You can just find him straight by clicking through from the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Otherwise, David, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.